Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, 1,459 days. That's how many more days you have of a Donald Trump presidency now that he's been sworn into office. Let's start with this.
You dumb maggots out there, I warned all of you. Donald Trump was going to pardon the violent criminals on January 6th, those that beat police officers, one with a baseball bat.
Yep.
And Donald Trump is pardoning everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you ever tell me again that you're the party of law and order.
Right.
You're not. Now, if you want to talk about pardoning those that didn't commit violent crimes that day, that's one thing. We're talking about the most violent of the January 6ers, those that attacked police officers with their own batons, those that sprayed police officers with bear spray. And Donald Trump has decided that he is going to pardon all of them. How could any decent, reasonable person be okay with this? You're a despicable human being if you're okay with Donald Trump pardoning everybody, including those that were responsible for beating police officers on January 6th. What a sad day for the country.
That is the voice of Brian Shapiro, not Ben Shapiro, Brian Shapiro of the Pushing the Limits podcast. Day one in the books, and let's see, we left the World Health Organization. That'll teach them for pushing back against injecting bleach in your body. Let's see, we left the Paris Accord again, because climate change, remember, is a hoax. Wildfires ravaging California, by the way, and Montana and Idaho and Colorado. When hurricanes attack western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, it's kind of hard not to notice the effects of climate change. But we're out of the Paris Accord. It's drill, baby, drill. There will be no more. I thought we liked tax credits on the right. What's up? What's wrong with the tax credit for folks who want to purchase an electric vehicle? I don't personally understand, especially when the first buddy is Elon Musk. Oh, we have to talk about the two Nazi salutes. Were it just one, you could say, okay, that was awkward. He didn't really know what he was doing. But he turned around to face the audience behind him, did it again. Of course, the J6ers released. We just heard Brian Shapiro of the Pushing the Limits podcast speak about that. I mean, that is just the first day of the Trump presidency. And it's going to be a long 1,459 days going forward. I don't think I'd be as concerned if we lived in normal times where even inside a party, you have ideologues who will push back. There were bumpers. I call them bumpers. When you go to the bowling alley, you can have the bumpers pulled up so that there are no gutter balls, right? There can be a lot of gutter balls in the next 1,459 days because there are no more Liz Cheneys. There are no more Ben Sasses. There are no more Mitt Romneys. Most and almost all of them have either stepped out or been expelled from the party. Jeff Duncan, no longer allowed to even say he's a Republican.
Former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan has been officially kicked out of Georgia's Republican Party. The state executive committee unanimously voted to expel him. Duncan has been one of President-elect Donald Trump's toughest critics. Earlier this year, he called the president-elect a criminal defendant without a moral compass. He also criticized Trump's erratic handling of the coronavirus pandemic and incendiary public comments. Duncan endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris during the election in November and even spoke at the DNC last summer. Now, Duncan has since already fired back on X tonight, saying, quote, "Hard to believe this is a good use of time for a party that's only got a limited amount of time to figure out mass deportations, world peace, and global tariffs. Learn how to take a victory lap, not light another dumpster fire," end quote. Duncan has not said whether he'll be joining the Democratic Party in the future.
That from 13 days ago on WAGA Fox 5 TV Atlanta. So there were a flurry of executive orders, and of course, because Donald Trump is a television entertainer, he made everything about the television. I imagine he might have been simmering just a little bit when the music didn't work out for Carrie Underwood, but Carrie Underwood's a performer. She knew how to handle singing. What was it? God Bless America? Yeah, she knew how to handle that. Outside of that, everything else was pretty well choreographed. I mean, his schedule got off kilter a little bit when he gave like a meandering 45-minute inaugural for his friends in the adjacent room of the rotunda, and then backed up the luncheon and all the other stuff. But I mean, you had the Capital One Arena spectacle. I had people messaging me all throughout the night. Are you watching this? Hell no. Hell no. I do enough of this for this podcast. I'm sorry. I'm going to enjoy a little bit of college football. And by the way, congrats, Ohio State University. Get out of town, please. Take this wintry stuff back with you. No, enjoy your stay, whatever. Just don't get involved in the traffic. We got enough of that. One of the executive orders dealt with trying to end birthright citizenship. You can be certain there will be a lot of pushback in the courts over that before it lands before the U.S. Supreme Court. I have no idea how they're going to unconstitutionalize something that is embedded in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, but I don't discount their ability to somehow make that happen. Then there was this. I'm deeply concerned about this. I'm deeply concerned about this for our men and women who serve in our U.S. military services at home and abroad. I worry about this for those in our intelligence branches because what President Trump did yesterday is going to irreparably undermine any trust folks outside our borders who are not U.S. citizens have for the work that they do. This from Ryan Sheed. Ryan, host of the Hold the Mic podcast. My apologies.
If you thought Donald Trump ending birthright citizenship was going to be the worst thing that happened today, it's probably going to be this. Trump to pull nearly 1,660 Afghan refugees from flights. You see, now these were folks that were already cleared by the U.S. government to resettle in the United States. This included family members of active duty U.S. military personnel. They're having their flights canceled under President Donald Trump's order suspending U.S. refugee programs. Where's all the pro-kids? Where's all those folks at? Because the group that Donald Trump just did this to included unaccompanied minors awaiting reunification with their families in the United States. And the worst part, it also includes Afghans that are at risk of Taliban retribution because they fought for us and the U.S.-backed Afghan government. You might be asking yourself, why should I care about that? Let me tell you why. Because once again, Donald Trump is spitting in the face of our allies, the people that help us when we're abroad. So if you look back, he abandoned the Kurds when he was president the first time. Now he's abandoning all the Afghanistan people that helped us. You know, the people that tried to help the 13 soldiers that were killed. So my point is next time that we expect to have allies, we're not going to have any because nobody's going to help us because they know that we're going to use them and then we're going to discard them like nothing. And we're going to treat their children even worse. Meanwhile, he's planning on reinstating people that were actually useless to our military. You see, the people that refused the COVID vaccine, let me explain the problem. It wasn't just because they refused the vaccine. It was because of mission readiness. Now, if you don't know what mission readiness is, go look it up. It means that your military force needs to be ready to deploy. It means deployability. So if there's a war or wars going on, it's usually a good idea to make sure that your forces are vaccinated for simple things like influenza, COVID, so on and so forth. Now, our third day through boot camp, we go through a line and we literally get hit with 4 to 5 different shots, giving us immunizations for smallpox, among other things. And if you're lucky enough to go in at a certain period of time in boot camp, you also get a nice little penicillin shot in your butt that feels like a frozen golf ball, and that hurts for a few days. Now, if you refuse those things when you're going through boot camp, do you know what happens to you? You get sent home. That's right, because you've now refused an order. The fact that they are going to let these people back in, back pay them for years, and have the government issue them an apology is just fucking mind-blowing. But hey, we just watched America swear in a convicted felon, an adjudicated rapist, an accused P to the E to the D to the O, and a prolific business fraud. So I guess this really shouldn't surprise us. Oh, I almost forgot. Trump also pardoned 1,500 January 6th defendants. You know, the ones that beat up police officers with flagpoles and fire extinguishers and riot shields and so on and so forth.
We covered that.
Yeah, that's the president. That's our leader.
But by the way, it was at 7:46 a.m. this morning that I got my first "He's Your President" on social media. Okay. 1,459 days that the Army of Petty gets to own the lip. Speaking of Petty, listen to this from CBS News.
You may have seen this portrait of General Mark Milley. It was unveiled just a few weeks ago in the Pentagon, and notably there is a what we're showing you is where that portrait has been taken down from the Pentagon. As Donald Trump came to power, we're told that the portrait of the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was removed. And highly unusual for a man who served 40 years in the U.S. military. Right. But General Milley got on the wrong side of Donald Trump, and as a result, President Biden issued a pardon for Milley today to warn against any future protection. And
so much for support the troops, right, righties, right, MAGAs? You support the troops, unless they are anyone who dare say one cross word or stand up against fearless leader. My apologies. But that's the era we live in now. We live in this area where intimidation is going to rule for the next 1,459 days. And if it doesn't concern you that someone who reached the highest rank in our U.S. military has to seek or receive a pardon from recrimination from the incoming president, you should at least be concerned that the oligarchs are also bending the knee, ... or else. Here's this from Jon Stewart last night.
Yes, taking the place of seats normally reserved for Democratic or Republican governors sat Zuck, Bezos, Tim Cook, Elon, Tic Tac guy, Google guy. The 6 guys who control maybe 20% of the world's wealth and 100% of your nudes. You don't need to pretend with me. I don't know what he's talking about. Delete. Populism, ladies and gentlemen. Shouldn't this gathering be happening in a volcano's lair near Zurich? Or are we just open source Illuminati now? Where's the conspiracy fun in that? Honestly, there is not a useful app of communication not controlled by at least one of these individuals.
Most of them.
And you may not be concerned that they've all ponied up $1 million to be sitting there and are kissing the ass of a president who openly threatens non-ass kissers. But trust me, shit's gonna get weird.
Mm-hmm. And listen, that's for all of us. But imagine being someone who enjoys birthright citizenship for now, or dreamers who have legal protection for now, or those who seek asylum. By the way, does Donald Trump think that political asylum, is the same as insane asylum? Because he keeps talking about prisoners and mental. Does he not understand political asylum versus mental asylum? Just openly wondering this. It's a question I may have for immigration attorney Kate Lincoln Goldfinch, who has joined the show before. We will have Kate on to help us understand the full scope of Donald Trump's actions, not just on day one, but the political rhetoric from throughout the 2024 campaign, and how much of it is tangible and actionable, and how much of it can be fended off in the courts. Or will it be? When the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or thank you for listening wherever you podcast. Joining me to help me, feel better or not, is Texas immigration attorney Kate Lincoln Goldfinch, the owner, CEO of the Lincoln Goldfinch Law Firm in Austin, Texas. Also, the co-host of the Law Moms Out Loud podcast on YouTube and YouTube page, which is devoted to helping female lawyers who want to have a successful career and home life. Kate, thank you for joining. You've been on my mind so much since election night when we had the results sort of bake in and wash over us. And I can only imagine what it's like for someone who is advocating and working as hard as you are for immigrants through a system that we all know is flawed and wrapped up in politics. And then you have an ideologue like Donald Trump, who is, I guess I call him the fence post turtle. What is he doing there? Well, we know how he got there. He got there from all the radical rhetoric, white nationalism, but he's actually doing harm to people and eventually the economy and yada, yada, yada. But let's just talk about the first day, the birthright citizenship thing. Can he get away with that when the Constitution clearly spells out that no, he can't get away with that?
Ultimately, no. I think even in, a more conservative federal court ecosystem that we have these days, the birthright citizenship won't survive, or the revocation of it, I should say. Because, the executive order says, what it says is that starting in 30 days from yesterday, any child born to a mother who is either out of status or in even temporary status, like if she's on a visa, and whose father is not a U.S. citizen, cannot get any governmental documents proving they're U.S. citizens. So it directs all the agencies not to issue social security cards or passports or even probably birth certificates from the states, for example. And, a lot of us have talked about this, so I'm sure people know this, but birthright citizenship is old. It's in our Constitution. It's the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The Supreme Court has weighed in on it since the 1800s and confirmed that this is a firmly entrenched function of our society. And so it's not something that one president can revoke with one memo. Something that is so fixed already for us. So, in a lot of these policies, I have concerns over these federal judges that have been appointed by Trump and even up to the Supreme Court. But birthright citizenship is one of those that is so far beyond presidential authority. I can't imagine that it will survive a, court challenge.
So I hear a lot about precedent there, but we learned that this very same court in its current makeup didn't give a rat's ass about precedent when it came to women's reproductive choices.
Well, we've got to remember we've got federal courts, the appellate courts, and then the Supreme Court. So somewhere along that process, I forget the judge's name, but even one of the high-ranking judges who's working with Trump had written this memo about how birthright citizenship could never go away. I need to look up his name. Okay. So even, conservative Trumpy judges, let's call them, even they are sort of no way, I would be very surprised. That's the most comfort I can give, because it's this is a concerning time where, we know they've got control of Congress, of course, obviously the presidency, and then also so many of these federal judges have been appointed in the first administration and are still here. And how conservative are they? Not judicial. I think we're going to have to wait and see. But this is one of those, I don't tend to worry about birthright citizenship. There's plenty of other stuff to worry about, but maybe I should be.
Understood. Legit question. Does Donald Trump not understand the difference between political asylum and insane asylum? He seems to talk about mentally ill and imprisoned people, but I legitimately think he doesn't understand the difference between the two.
I think, I agree. And I think what he has said and done and created in the minds of many, many Americans is that someone who comes to the border who is asking for help is presumably a criminal, right, a terrorist, a drug trafficker. They're out to hurt us, which, I've now, it's been since 2008. So getting on 20 years that I've worked with thousands of asylum seekers because I'm in Texas. And pretty much, I would say 99% plus of all of the people that I have met are fleeing something very difficult. Now, whether they qualify for asylum or not is another question, but either they were extorted by the gangs, or someone in their family was murdered, or they lost everything, or the economy of their country totally collapsed, and they were forced to upend their entire lives, leave their families, leave their homes, take a dangerous trek across borders to get to our border. People don't put themselves through that unless something has happened to them. And I will also say that in my experience, people like that are very impressive. They're very brave. They're ambitious. They're strong. They are the kinds of people that I would say we want in our midst. And, the statistics back this up, that the crime rate of immigrants is significantly lower than native-born citizens. But unfortunately, what happens is when we have a crime committed by an immigrant, like the Laken Riley murder, for example, it's everywhere. It's all anybody is talking about. And so it gives this impression that, all of the Venezuelans coming over are all criminals. Well, that's not accurate. It's not accurate, and we're diverting our attention away from what matters. Like, if we care about law enforcement and protecting women and girls and all of that, actually looking at immigrants is the wrong way to look if we want to make an impact on that issue. But it doesn't play politically to, look at the reality, as we know.
Kate Lincoln Goldfinch with the Lincoln Goldfinch Law Firm. Going to take a quick break, come back. I do want to talk a little bit more about the impact of the promise of mass deportations, not just anecdotally, but empirically as well. When the Ron Show returns here on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Again, I want to thank Kate Lincoln Goldfinch from the Lincoln Goldfinch firm in Austin, Texas, handling immigration law, for joining us to talk on The Ron Show today. So much to dive into, but let me do a little bit of a retrospective if I can. A lot of folks want to point to the fact that President Joe Biden made a mess of this. Like, he let people in unfettered, opened the borders, yada, yada, yada. A lot of that is political hyperbole, and it's hard to explain to those in the political or outside the political sphere what I think President Joe Biden was trying to do, which was to get Congress to do something that was going to be long-lasting, because our immigration system is broken. It is set at 1960 statistical data, and the population of the globe has, tripled in size or something like that since then. Maybe not quite so much. But speak to me about, if you will, some of the things that you think President Joe Biden tried to do correctly that didn't work out or didn't do right, or in retrospect, what could he have done differently to bring about some change that would have lasted longer than just the ink on a presidential executive order pen?
Sure. And I like the way you set that up, because really, ultimately, no president is going to be impactful on immigration policy unless and until Congress passes immigration reform, because it's absolutely true that as a nation, we have a need of immigrants, yet we don't have a system that supports them coming here to fill our need legally. And so until we resolve that issue, we are going to continue to have, confusion, executive action, the judiciary stepping in, et cetera, issues at the border. All of that is a result of our failure to have a system in place that allows for the immigrants that we need. But Biden, the rhetoric around him at the border is completely inaccurate. I mean, he didn't open the borders, of course. He didn't just allow people to flood in. He had more deportations, actually, than Trump did. But some of the things that he did that I thought were heading us in a better direction were the usage of the app, the CBP One app, which Trump shut down yesterday.
Shut down immediately.
Completely shut it. But this app was the way that asylum seekers were able to, register in the system and ask for permission to come and submit their background information and a photo, and they would wait and get invited for an interview. And they didn't have to be at the border to be in the system. So it relieved some of this pressure along the U.S.-Mexico border, which of course increased cartel violence. It was very dangerous for people. They would get desperate and try to cross before they had their appointment. All of that stuff was alleviated through the usage of this app. And there were these heartbreaking videos of people yesterday who had been, in the system waiting, and the system just got shut down, and they just completely lose their opportunity to come after months and months and months of, doing it the right way. And that tracks with what I've seen. I've gone to the border and I've talked to people on the other side just to get a sense of what's going on. And it's all, in my experience, it's all been about the app. They're trying to do it the right way. So that was one thing that I think was really tragic yesterday. And then also these parole programs. For example, there's a parole program that Biden announced for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, all countries which have high numbers of asylum applicants coming to our border because of what's going on in those countries. And this parole program allowed for people to use the app and to apply for entry. They had a relative here where they wouldn't have to come and cross the border. And that program is also getting shut down by Trump. So some of the ways that the solutions that Biden had put in place to alleviate this pressure at the border are immediately being revoked. And of course, Trump is just going straight enforcement. It's just cancel everything. Nobody's coming in. We're declaring an invasion. We're sending the military. And that, I think it should concern. I know some people are like, well, good. We don't want anyone here. Well, number one, that's not who we are as a nation. We have asylum laws in our legal system ever since World War II.
And international law that we have to adhere to as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And number two, we know through historical experience that pure enforcement doesn't resolve the issue and can in many ways increase the violence. So it's not, what happened yesterday is tragic, sad. It's impacting many, many lives, and that matters. And then for the people who aren't moved by this sort of humanitarian angle of all of this, there is a real danger for us in the United States and our economy if we don't resolve the pro-immigration needs that we have.
I was actually starting to be somewhat optimistic leading up to yesterday that perhaps he might be a little more restrained in his actions because of the economy. I think Wall Street reactions tend to have an impact on him more than anybody else whispering in his ear. And Wall Street has been saying, the bond markets have been saying, this mass deportation talk, it ain't good. We can't project out a healthy, robust economy if we're sweeping up millions of people and sending them away when the economy is so impacted by their presence.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope he did hear that message. And, notably, there weren't any massive raids conducted yesterday. We'll see, the threats, of course, are that they go on after the blue cities where they don't have cooperative agreements with local law enforcement to enforce immigration. So cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Denver, San Antonio, all of these cities are on the short list for actually Austin, where I am. But we'll have to see if that really comes to fruition. I sure hope not, but I am skeptical that they are going to hold back on that. I think that, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to mention, you mentioned Austin, and Austin's a blue city in a red state. So, I mean, that's sort of like doubly, it amplifies what a city like Austin may be up against, not just dealing with federal enforcement, but also the state.
Oh, yeah, we feel it all the time. There's always a push-pull between us and the state. And now the legislature's in session. So they, target city policies. And I think Austin certainly is at risk for these enforcement actions. Absolutely. But I think we should anticipate some splashy, ugly enforcement activities because that was such a drumbeat campaign promise. So if they were to just not do that at all, then it would be a total failure to make good on their, campaign promises. But it's possible that they could do a couple of big splashy actions, get a lot of media around it, and then stop. That's possible, and that would be better.
We're with Texan immigration and attorney Kate Lincoln Goldfinch, the owner-CEO of the Lincoln Goldfinch Law in Austin, also co-host of the Law Moms Out Loud, a podcast and YouTube page devoted to helping female lawyers who want to have successful careers and home lives. We're talking about the Trump immigration impact in the immediate and in the near and, 1,459-day future that we still have to look forward to. I want to go back a little bit and talk about what the Biden-Harris administration was able to do. Again, in limited numbers, the app, you spoke really well about the app and how that, a use of modern technology sort of released, I guess, a little bit of pressure on a system that is just overburdened and understaffed. That's not going to change anytime soon unless you account for National Guardsmen or military use at the border, which doesn't really solve the immigration problem and the processes that these folks are dealing with. But also, Kamala Harris got a lot of flack for being a border czar that she never was. She didn't get the credit, I believe, for dealing with what she was charged with, which was dealing with root causation of migration in a few key Central American countries. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, the two big issues are the push factor and the pull factor,
Yes.
right? And so the push factor is what drives people out of their countries. And could we instead use some of our resources to help boost the nations that are driving people out? Now, if they have dictatorships and all of that stuff, then it's complicated, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But then the pull factors is what we talked about. We have this need for immigration. And so let's honor that need and create a system that allows people to come to serve the need of this country at the end of the day. But I would say, to the question about Kamala's work as, on immigration and even the Biden administration overall, in my opinion, their biggest failure was their failure to talk about it because they were so quiet. They just didn't want to discuss it,
Right.
And so the other side is just screaming and jumping up and down about invasions and terrorism and drug trafficking and all of the stuff that really scared the crap out of a lot of people. And what would have been great is if on the other side, Biden and Harris consistently would have been saying, actually, the data shows this. The reality is this. Here is what we're doing. Here is the, I mean, of course, that's not as much of a soundbite, but we didn't get that from them. They just stayed completely silent almost on the issue. And that created this like cesspool of upset people who ultimately became Trump voters.
Well, and when you have situations like the Lake and Riley murder here in Athens, Georgia, it's hard to put up an example to counter that. How do you come up with an example that counters that? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and anytime there's a news story about an immigrant who commits a crime, I just no, because the data is immigrants commit crimes way, 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 way less often than U.S. citizens. But and I don't. It'd be interesting to look at. I probably will look at this. How many women and girls were attacked and murdered? Not by immigrants, and we don't know their names. There's not an act for them, but it's like this one, statistically anomalous situation becomes the story of crime, which is so false. I mean, I was on another radio show this morning in Alabama, and then the host was saying, well, just all these criminals just coming across the border, all these Venezuelans, they're just coming here to commit crime, which is so not the reality, but that's what these media stories tell people. Well, and that's the conversation.
The other reality is that there was a study that came out a week before the election. I want to say 6 days before the election. The Cato Institute, not exactly a liberal think tank, a libertarian think tank. The Cato Institute did the data, speaking of data, and showed that more criminal immigrants came through our borders during the Trump administration because the Trump administration was so fixated on big numbers that they weren't laser focused on criminal numbers, that more criminal immigrants came into the U.S. under his presidency than under the Biden administration, because the Biden administration was at least trying to do it exactly as you spoke of, using the app, going through the proper procedures, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, okay, well, data is good. Background checks are good. I think all of us can agree. And I mean, also to the point of the undocumented population, instead of, targeting a few undocumented people and separating families and upsetting the economy, what if instead we said, okay, we've got 11 million people who are entrenched. They've been living here. They have jobs. We rely on them. Let's create a system for them to all come out of the shadows, register, get work permits, get driver's license, make it easier for them to get auto insurance, charge them a fine. I mean, the immigrants I know who are undocumented would gladly pay each of them thousands of dollars of a fine just for access to a social security number and a driver's license and protection against deportation. Think about the income that could come from a program like that. And then we wouldn't have this, shadow population in the country. I mean, if we really care about law enforcement, well, anti-immigrant, just deport everyone is not the answer.
Well, and the other part is, you hear the talk about, they're going to take Social Security and our Medicare. They're stealing. They're actually not. They're contributing to those programs without the promise of ever receiving a dime back from it. In many cases,
100%. Many of the clients that I know, they work under a Social Security number that's not theirs, and it goes into the system, and they never see that money again.
My last question for you, Kate, is this. I notice a little bit of the treehouse effect happening, and I'm sure you do too because you live in Texas. I call it the treehouse effect is folks who have gotten through the process and become U.S. citizens and then totally abandon their principle, their ideological, premise that we should have a more tangible immigration policy, and have abandoned the Democratic Party. We're seeing a lot of this, specifically along the Texas-Mexico border. What is the cause of that, and what can Democrats do to speak to those minds?
Gosh, this is such a deep question, and I've not heard that phrase, the treehouse effect.
Oh yeah, it's where you got up in the treehouse and you pull the ladder up.
Well, and I think about you remember in high school how the freshmen get hazed, but it's like the sophomores who are the worst hazers.
Right.
It's the same principle. It's like someone, and I saw a tweet that said no one hates immigrants more than someone who just got their papers, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, I don't get that.
It's a need to distance oneself. It's like they're different. I've made it, I think it's human nature. Not that I support it. I think, I wish that everyone would have a connection with the people who are right behind them and reach your hand out and pull them up. And that's the way we ought to be as humans. And yet we aren't. And that probably goes back, I don't know, since the dawn of time. That's a question for an anthropologist, I think.
Maybe so. Well, listen, I know you got your work cut out for you for the next 1,459 days, and today is just another one of them. I want to thank you for joining me today, Kate Lincoln Goldfinch with the Lincoln Goldfinch Law Firm in Austin, Texas. Thank you for joining the Ron Show today and for doing the work you do. It's yeoman's work.
Thanks. It was a great conversation. I look forward to having another one.
Final few minutes for today's Ron Show, and as long as CNN continues to employ him, Daniel Dale is going to be a valued resource for the next 1,459 days. After a meandering Trump, not the inaugural speech, by the way, utter disrespect in that speech, in that he was speaking to people who were right behind him. He was speaking to Biden-Harris era policies that, of course, he can disagree with. That's all fine and well. Inauguration speeches aren't for, well, I utterly disagree with this and that. I mean, it was just utter disrespect, just complete abdication of decorum when it comes to giving a speech to an American public that we used to think we wanted to be united. Donald Trump did not speak of unity. He spoke completely of division in that inaugural, but then went to the room with the pals, the friends, the backers, the supporters, and spewed all the nonsense, all the campaign rhetoric we'd heard before, all the untruths. My point is, after all of that, I mean, it was like a 45 minutes. It was longer than the inaugural speech, for crying out loud, when all he had to do was go in and say that. In fact, he said himself, I could have given the A, B, C, D, F treatment. I gave you the A+ treatment by going on and on and on, like delaying his own lunch. I'm sure I sat there and watched as Speaker Johnson and Vice President J.D. Vance all stood behind for like more than half an hour, awkwardly standing and kind of leaning their body weight from one leg to the other, looking at their watches discreetly. Anyway, Daniel Dale from CNN is going to be a valued resource. He is the fact checker that we've all come to know and need after a long-winded Trump marathon speech of lies. Here he is yesterday after the second of them.
Daniel Dale, I know there's a lot of familiar lies that were just told, but bring us up to speed on what you think the biggest ones were.
There were a bunch, Jake. I thought it was interesting that the president gave a scripted inaugural address in which, honestly, there was not a ton to fact check. I'd say a smattering of falsehoods. And then immediately after, in this unscripted speech, he returned to his familiar lie-a-minute style. So he said the 2020 election was totally rigged. We know that's a lie. He said his opponents tried to rig it this time. That's more nonsense. He said California Democrats tried to cheat and that he thinks he would have won the state this time if it were not rigged. Well, it was a free and fair election in that state as well. He lost by more than 3 million votes. He claimed he won Alabama this time by 48 points, or like between 30 and 31. And then on immigration, he spoke of the jails of every country in the world being emptied into this country. He has never provided any evidence for his familiar claim that foreign countries are deliberately emptying prisons to send people here as migrants. He boasted of building 571 miles of border wall. Official statistics show it was actually 458 miles. And then he turned to January January 6th, he spoke at length about, he said the committee deleted all evidence, almost everything. It simply did not. That did not happen, although there is a dispute about the preservation of some data and some video interviews that the committee conducted. And he repeated this claim that former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has admitted that she rejected a Trump offer of 10,000 National Guard troops on January 6, 2021. First of all, there is no basis for the claim Trump even made her such an offer. It wouldn't even have made sense given that he, the president, is the commander of the D.C. National Guard. The Speaker of the House has no authority to deploy them or thwart a deployment.
Right.
And second of all, she never admitted that such an offer was made. She has steadfastly rejected that. She is on tape on January 6th expressing frustration with the security failure that day and saying that I take responsibility for not having them better prepared. But that kind of vague assertion that, I could have done more here is not an admission that she turned down any specific security offer. She has never made such an admission whatsoever, Jake.
Daniel Dale spoke of the lie-a-minute fashion. I want you to hear this cult expert, Dr. Stephen Fasson, because the lie-a-minute part is what we have to be careful. I don't know how we ward against this, but this is part of the cult tactic.
My name is Dr. Stephen Hassan. I'm a cult expert with 45 years of experience. If you want to mind control someone, confuse them. The easiest way to confuse a person is to overload them.
Sadists who prey on children are released on bail, but there is no bail and there is no bond. Unique, never happened before.
Trump is a master at understanding how to say outrageous things, confusing things, and taking advantage of people.
You look at Singapore, you look at other countries where they have the death penalty, they have no drug problem whatsoever. And if we did that, in 1 year, even if it was not strong, because it's never going to be quite like China.
I wrote a book called The Cult of Trump. It was not an easy decision to agree to do it. There's valid criticism that by calling people who believe in Trump a cult member would be offended by that.
Well.
And I don't say it easily. And I don't say it with malice, because I was in a cult. There are multiple ways to tell whether a group falls on the ethical or benign or even productive end of the influence continuum as a cult. And when people say, Steve, what's an example of a benign cult? Then I say, well, I'm a scuba diver and I spend large amounts of money traveling around the world, but I can have a conversation with anyone else who does scuba diving, even though they're a complete stranger. People can be sports cult fanatics. I've only used Apple since 1982, and I currently own about 10 different devices. A healthy cult will tell you honestly who they are, what they believe, and what they want from you if you join. Whereas authoritarian cults will lie blatantly, withhold vital information, or distort it to make it palatable for you. A healthy cult will always honor your conscience, will never tell you who you can associate with, what you can read or what you can't read, what TV show to watch. A mind control cult will control all of that.
And if they don't physically control all of that, they eventually take it over. Twitter X, Meta. And yes, they do try to control what you or I watch by telling you that CNN or MSN or CBS News or ABC News, NBC, fake news media, they tell you the NFL has gone woke. I watched the college football national championship last night, and disturbingly, in the midst of that, at halftime, there was a clip of Trump. Could you imagine if that had been Joe Biden or Barack Obama? Holy fucking shit, there would have been a shit fit about woke media injecting politics into sports. And yet, I didn't hear a whole lot of noise about that from the predictable cast of characters in my social media feed who would make noise about that. Nope, just another routine day, one of 1,459 still to come. That is going to do it for today's Ron Show. I want to thank Kate Lincoln Goldfinch for joining me at the last minute, too, by the way. What a rock star she is. We're on weekdays, 9 a.m., 5 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Take care.